We get a lot of clarity and a new beginning this week that is going to be really nice, but by the end of the week, that clarity might turn into confusion as Mercury squares Neptune. So let's just go ahead and get started with it. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. This time we were talking about June 10th through June 16th of 2024. Did you know that this is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts? And if you are an amazing podcast listener of this, please feel free to give me a 5-star review. If you really like it, it will support my channel, and I really, really appreciate it. But anyway, this is a interesting week, and the thing that I wanted to kind of just talk about first is Mars is now in Taurus as we go out throughout this week, and like I said last week, things start to slow down a little bit. A lot of this is about keeping the momentum that we have had with Mars in Aries over the past about month and a half. There was a lot of there was a lot of initiation, there was a lot of just like, again, trying to move forward as fast as possible, whether you like that or not. But with Mars being in Taurus, this is much more like stable, consistent. And it is Mars. It is a malefic that might involve some issues. However, I bring that up because as time moves on throughout the rest of June and into July, things do kind of slow down. And I think that will be nice for some people. But if you're one of those people that are like always looking to go, like me, you might feel that a little bit frustrating. So I think it's important to kind of like understand that in this time right now, this is more about like consistency. This is more about like, hey, what is our flat line? What is our baseline? Rather than just kind of like, completely going to a stop, or again, trying to press on the throttle when you're also pressing on the brake. So we start this week off on Monday with the moon in Leo, and all it's really doing is making a sextile to Mercury. I like this. I love having the moon in Leo, and maybe I'm biased because I am a Leo, but the moon is like, again, emotions, pride, how we're feeling day to day. It is in Leo. So there is this sense of wanting to feel seen, wanting to be passionate, wanting to be bold. And with the moon in the sign of the sun is in Gemini, so there's a lot of this stimulation, there's a lot of this information going on. I just kind of like the vibe on Monday. The moon will be making a sextile to Mercury, where Mercury's in Gemini. We have all of the tools available to us to communicate efficiently, to communicate clearly, to communicate exactly what we want. And I feel like with the moon in Leo making a sextile to Mercury, it's just that confidence boost to just kind of like say it how it is and not be afraid. In my newsletter, I just put out an email, I believe yesterday or the day before, about, with everything like in Gemini, it's like, flirt with someone, go have a conversation with someone, don't be afraid to open up those doors, let all the opportunities kind of come to you. And I bring up the flirting thing because the moon in Leo making a sextile to Mercury is just kind of like, sometimes you need that little bit of a confidence boost to kind of say the thing that you want to say, right? It's easy for us to get very insecure about how we feel, or what about rejection. And the moon in Leo making a sextile to Mercury is very, hey, I've got the confidence to say this. I've got the, I've got the prowess. I've got the gall to say this, and I'm going to say it. And it's not, it's a sextile, right? It's just very loose. It's not very, like direct, like I'm going to say something really bold. It's very just kind of like flirtatious in a confident way that's very fun. So I really like Monday for that. All right, here. Work with me here. So then we get to Tuesday, and on Tuesday, the moon will make a sextile to the sun and Venus at the same time. It will then make a square to Uranus. In between that, we will have Mars making a square to Pluto, and then the moon will ingress into Virgo later on Tuesday evening. Now, the moon sextiling the sun and Venus, again, I think that just kind of emphasizes all of the things that we just talked about for Monday. There being this kind of fun, playfulness attitude. Venus is in Gemini. We're looking for that socializing, that connection, that fun, that stimulation. The moon in Leo just adds on top of that. And I think it just, again, or I should say the moon making a sextile to Venus adds more to that. More fun, more pleasure. The moon will make a square to Uranus, though, where, again, you never know who you're hitting on, or you never know how the reaction's going to be. One of the things I kind of look at with the moon squaring Uranus is I don't even like saying expect the unexpected, but it's one of those things where if you're expecting everything to go smooth and streamlined just because you're feeling good, doesn't mean it's going to go that way. And I just think the moon squaring Uranus will kind of, break apart that, smooth energy. There will be some sort of a disruption that could kind of bother you, and it can kind of throw you in for a loop. And again, it's going to be important to, I don't want to say even prepare for that, but it's easier to handle disruptions in your life when you can go with the flow, when you know how to adapt and overcome. And so I look at Tuesday as like, all right, there's like a really fun start to Tuesday, but there is going to be kind of a wrench thrown in your plans. Be able to adapt and overcome with it. And that gets added on with Mars squaring Pluto. I have interesting thoughts about Mars squaring Pluto. And the thing is with the Pluto stuff, you see so much more of it in, the news, geopolitics, weird stuff like that. And it's one of those things where if you're not really looking for it, it could be hard to miss. But on a more personal level, Pluto is, again, like ultimate power, fear, corruption, greed, all of those like really extreme things. It's like what is behind closed doors. And Pluto is in the superior position to Mars. And if you're not familiar with what the superior position is, that is when a planet, like let's say Mars is in the first house, Pluto would be in the 10th. And that would mean it is in the superior position to Mars since it is in the 10th house. With Pluto being in the superior position here, and Mars is in detriment in Taurus. Mars is about fights and conflicts, energy, drive. Taurus is a little bit more calm, a little bit more slow moving. It gets frustrated really easily when things don't work the way that it wants it to work. There's a lot of stubbornness associated with it. And I look at like Mars squaring Pluto as like stubbornness and the inability to move may not be your friend here. It reminds me of I might have said this last week, but Mars squaring Pluto is if you are faced with a mountain lion or a bear or something like that, there are times where running away makes sense, and there are times where playing dead makes sense. And this is one of those things where I don't necessarily like you playing dead, if that makes sense. Like Mars squaring Pluto is like, I'm going to be paralyzed with fear and just not do anything. I'm going to like stand my ground, essentially. I'm not going to move. And there just seems to be like a power struggle within that. So Tuesday, I feel like feels frustrating in terms of like, for example, if you are, it's so funny talking about a bear thing because of the whole like, would you rather be stuck with a bear or a man in the woods, that whole dumb thing. But I look at Mars in Taurus, squaring Pluto there's times where inaction is going to help you, but it's not going to feel good. Like if you are, for example, I've watched a lot of there's this channel I like watching a lot called Active Self-Protection, and it's just this guy that goes over video footage, whether it's like security cameras or body cam footage of like self-defense situations. And one of the things that he talks about is like purposeful compliance and like knowing your turn or waiting your turn and taking your turn, meaning like, okay, if you're getting mugged, let's say you're getting mugged. You don't have a weapon to defend yourself, right? And someone's got a weapon pointed at you. If you're going to try to fight that person, there's a good chance they're going to harm you with whatever weapon that they have. There is a time for purposeful compliance, and you might just have to give them your stuff, and they might run away, and that's going to feel frustrating, right? Like there's nothing worse than feeling like you can do something about it or like wanting to do something about like, again, defending yourself or attacking, but you just can't in that moment. And that's how I look at like Mars square Pluto. Like there's this feeling of needing to defend yourself or wanting to, again, push through with something, but just knowing that this isn't the right place and the right time. And again, a lot of that's going to be fear-based. A lot of that's going to be power situations. So like, again, if you're getting mugged by someone, let's say you don't have any sort of self-protection on you and you don't know fucking jujitsu or anything like that, and they've got a weapon in your face, you might just have to say, you know what, fuck it. Like, here's my wallet, here's my phone, fuck off. And it's going to feel frustrating afterwards that you weren't able to do anything about it. But hey, you're alive. Hey, you're not going to prison. Hey, that's really the best case scenario, although it can be frustrating. And Pluto is fear, Pluto is power. And there is a part of it where, because it's in the superior position where, hey, there are things that are more powerful than you or people that are more powerful than you that might force you to do something. The other way I look at it is if Pluto is like fear, I wonder how much like fear just kind of takes over us. Meaning, okay, like, am I going to be paralyzed with fear? Am I going to have inaction because of fear? And I feel like with Tuesday, that feeling might overcome you. And that's not to say that like, oh, it's the worst thing ever, or you should find a way to get out of it. With astrology, like sometimes it's good to just honor the time and like, hey, you just might feel frustrated on Tuesday, and rather than combating it, rather than kind of like trying to push through it, maybe just kind of like go inward a little bit, reflect a little bit. Why do you feel that way? Like let that feeling go through so you can work through it later. And I just feel like Tuesday has that feeling of feeling powerless or feeling stuck or that you can't do much. Now, later on Tuesday evening, the moon does go into Virgo, and it will make a trine to Mars very early on Wednesday morning. But as the moon goes into Virgo, it's a little bit less like, again, with this Mars square Pluto thing, the moon's in Leo. It's like we want to fight, we want to be combative, but this isn't the right place and the right time. And I look at the moon going into Virgo as like kind of like when you go through I don't even want to say a traumatic situation, but let's say a situation where there was a lot of adrenaline, where there was a lot of action, your mind instantly starts kind of compartmentalizing everything and being like, just overthinking. And I feel like that could be a big part of Tuesday is like, okay, how did I handle that situation? What could I have done different? How did I go about that? Why was that person that way? What could have changed? And so there's this kind of like organizing our emotions around it. which I feel like could be very beneficial on Tuesday. Now, when we get into Wednesday, the moon will then make a trine to Mars very early in the morning, and then it's going to make a square to Jupiter. And the highlight that we have going on Wednesday is Mercury making a square to Saturn. So with the moon in Virgo making a trine to Mars, what I do like about this is like, hey, when it comes to even, let's just say Mars is in Taurus and you're just feeling lazy, right? The moon in Virgo is like, what are these lazy things that I can do? Or at least I should say the moon in Virgo making a trine to Mars. Like if you're just not feeling motivated or inspired, what is one thing that you can get done? What is the small list of things that do not take that much energy or time that you can get done, that you can get organized? For example, in the winter time, you can't do yard work. It's too cold outside. So a lot of people, when it's like snowing outside, like they take care of all that junk that's in their closet, or they reorganize some sort of cabinet that they've, been meaning to get to. That's kind of the vibe on Wednesday with the moon in Virgo making a trine to Mars, is like, hey, I want to get, like, here's my list of things I want to accomplish, and I only have the energy for one thing that could be sustained for a long time. Like Mars in Aries is very like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. Mars in Taurus is like, I just want to really get one thing done. What is that one thing I can get done? But then the moon will make a square to Jupiter. And with the moon in Virgo squaring Jupiter and Gemini, it reminds me of, this is what's so dumb about the internet. Like the internet is so great because you can learn all these new things and see how everyone does things. But it's like, some people, like let's say you want to organize your bookshelf. Some people say, do it color organized, do it alphabetical, do it, this way, flip the books reverse so you could just see the paper and it's all aesthetic. It's like, there's so many ways to do things. And when we like look up something online, or we do some research on how to do something better or how to improve on it, we can kind of get overwhelmed with information, and that can create kind of a analysis paralysis. Like we spend too long planning and prepping. And, I heard the quote, a quote the other day, like planning is not doing the thing. Getting ready to do the thing is not doing the thing. Researching the thing is not doing the thing. And I feel like the moon in Virgo making a square to Jupiter and Gemini is kind of like realizing that. Like, have you ever tried to look up something, but for whatever reason, the information you're looking up is just not sticking in your brain, and you really don't know why? And really at the end of the day, it's because it's like you're in a position where you should just be doing the thing and learning along the way and not researching. So I just think the moon in Virgo making a square to Jupiter is feeling a little bit overwhelmed with all the information and not sure which direction you should take. That gets added on with Mercury squaring Saturn, which is our highlight for Wednesday. Love Mercury in Gemini. I'm really looking forward to the Mercury Cazimi this week because, again, everything's in Gemini, so it's all ruled by Mercury. So Mercury Cazimi is going to be really nice for that. But as Mercury makes a square to Saturn, Saturn is, again, kind of in the superior position here. And Mercury's in Gemini, where, again, we have the clarity, we have the information, we have the plan, we have the logistics, all of that. And Saturn in Pisces is kind of like, hey, are you wasting time looking things up? Are you, like, again, I kind of come back to planning for the thing, writing the thing down, researching the thing still isn't doing the thing. And if Saturn is, again, like authority, and Saturn is like maturity and also hard walls, it's in Pisces, where Pisces is like the internal, like the very yin energy of us, of like spirituality. And something I've been coming back to with Saturn and Pisces is like, if Sagittarius is the, here's my dreams, here's my point B, this is where I'm going, this is the adventure of my life. Like Pisces is like, who do you have to be to get there? And Mercury in Gemini is kind of like, oh, it's really easy to be rational. It's really easy to be logical about stuff. But something I've been thinking a lot about, and I've said this so many times, and it's one of those things that it's just recently hit me with how fucking true it is. I said this on my Jupiter and Gemini video. In Rhetorius's work on astrology, he brings up, and it's our first quote around why Mercury doesn't do well in Jupiter signs and why Jupiter doesn't do well in Mercury signs, is that logic is opposed to abundance. And on the surface, logically, that makes sense. But really think about it. In order to be abundant, in order to have hope and faith, that might require you to let go of logic. Like, again, so we're so oftentimes like, be like, oh, I want this abundance, or I want this great thing, but I have to do it logically and rationally. And it's like, no, that's the whole opposite of what you're supposed to be doing. Like, sometimes you have to throw out the logic in order to have access to that abundance. And I feel like Mercury and Gemini making a square to Saturn and Pisces is kind of like, hey, the logic and the rationale stuff is working really, really well right now, albeit Jupiter's in Gemini. But as it squares Saturn and Pisces, you might realize you may not get to where you want to go just by being logical and rational. Because, again, if you want more abundance in your life, whatever that looks like, right? you're not going to get there by, planning and being detailed and like those things might help in order for you to make sense. But like sometimes you have to disassociate that and focus more on like, again, I don't even like using this term, but like manifesting that stuff, like believing more in the opportunity of it, believing and having faith that those things will happen and not worrying about the logic and the rationale of how it's going to happen. But I feel like on Wednesday, that connection of like, oh, I have all this logic, but still underneath it all, I don't know if I actually believe it to be real or to be true. The other part of Mercury squaring Saturn, the more like basic mundane astrology is like, all right, Mercury and Gemini, you might, put in this resume and you're the perfect candidate for the job and you still might get denied. And you don't really know why. Like Mercury squaring Saturn is an authority telling you no. There is some sort of communication that happens that is rejected. There is some sort of, again, I think the easiest way to put it is like communication is rejected. Communication has walls or barriers, or again, maybe you send in that resume and all this other stuff and, you never hear anything back and you don't really know why. And maybe your email just never went through or something like that. But I look at like Mercury squaring Saturn as there's being like, if we're communicating, if we're expressing, there's some sort of a hard wall or a boundary or a no being told. Now, if we take that more on a spiritual, like inner level, it just seems like to me of like, hey, maybe we're being just too logical and rational. Something I think a lot about, I love stories of people like scheming their way into things. Like I think it was, who is the director of Jaws? I can't remember his name at the moment, but, how he got into being a director for Jaws was literally, he walked by, I think it was like Universal Studios every day for the security guards to recognize him. And then, as the security guards recognized him, somehow he snuck in, kind of started hanging around the studios and around like sets and whatnot. And then one day I think he like took over for a movie and it didn't work. And then he, like put in his script for Jaws and, Steven Spielberg, that's who I'm thinking of, right? I think it's Steven Spielberg. But he pretty much just kind of swindled his way into being one of the biggest directors of our lifetimes. And I love that for like, again, that's not logical or rational. The logical, rational way of doing things is like, hey, I'm going to write a bunch of scripts and I'm going to submit them to these people. I'm going to have these interviews and I'm going to work my way from the bottom to the top. Like sometimes you just have to be like, you know what? Fuck all that shit. I'm going to figure out a way because I know that there's a way and I know that I can get there. And rather than doing things logical and rational, I'm going to, again, do the more jovial thing of like, what if I just did this? And so I think Wednesday is going to be a good day to look at how you can apply those kind of factors in your life of, hey, even though we really want to be logical and we want to be rational here, that just might not be the move with Mercury squaring Saturn. And you might have that rejection there. And that's not to say, oh my gosh, you should never do this thing because you got one form of rejection. You should say, okay, how can I take a different approach to this? We could then get to Thursday. And on Thursday, the moon, while it's in Virgo, is going to go opposite Saturn. The moon in Virgo, prepping, planning, being detailed, opposite Saturn is like, there is a resistance to that, right? There is a resistance to wanting to let go of what we feel like we're in control of. Like Mercury stuff reminds me of like control. Like if mentally we can understand something, we can feel like we're in control, but at the end of the day, like we're not. We have I feel like control is an illusion a lot of the time. But as the moon goes opposite Saturn, there's this resistance of like, okay, you can organize, you can detail, you can make yourself feel as like comfortable as you can with all of the numbers and the data. But at the end of the day, like that's not going to solve that Jupiter issue. Like rationale and logic as opposed to abundance. Like God, like that, it's been so funny. I've been saying that for like 2 years now. And it's just recently hit me. Like, because I've been so rational and organized in so many things. And it's just like, if I'm really doing this astrology stuff and I really believe this, like, what does this actually mean? Like, I actually can't be logical and rational about everything. Like, sometimes I have to be like, I have to disassociate all that and be abundant. And it's one of those things where it reminds me of people that are just like happy-go-lucky. They don't plan, they don't prep, and just good things just happen to them because they believe the good things are going to happen to them. And then we, the people that are very like organized and detailed and want all the data, get all frustrated about it because they're doing the things that we want and we're not. And so I look at the moon in Virgo opposite Saturn, that resistance to wanting to like, again, let go of control and wanting to say like, oh, but I want to have, but what if I do this little thing or what if I do that little thing? And don't get me wrong, the rational stuff is really, really important. But as it goes opposite Saturn, there is this wall I feel like that you're going to hit. And it's one of those things where something that I've realized is if, again, the logic and rationale as opposed to abundance, I've looked at like, why am I not believing in abundance? Why do I not have faith and hope in that? And that's something I've noticed with Saturn and Pisces is like, wow, I've actually not been that like I feel like when I was younger, I was just like fucking anything is possible, and I still feel like I believe those things, but when I actually look at my life, I'm not. And I feel like with Saturn and Pisces, I'm like, oh, like, am I getting like the old man syndrome where it's like nothing is, you can't do anything you want. You need to like just do the thing that, you can. And it just reminds me of like taking away of that, like, childhood innocence and that childhood imagination and creativity. And I've been really working on that of like, I have to really like loosen that part up of myself. I have to really tap back into that because it's not healthy to not have that balance. And I feel like with Jupiter and Gemini, we might kind of learn that like, hey, if Jupiter's all about abundance and stuff, it's in the sign of like logic and rationale. It's in detriment. We might kind of see that connection of like, oh, hey, that might not work. And so then the moon, after it goes opposite Saturn, we feel like that resistance, the moon's going to make a square to Mercury, where moon's in Virgo making a square to Mercury and Gemini, where it's like, now we have all this information, we have all this organized data, and what are we even doing with it? Is it even helpful? What do we even do? Like, again, knowledge, I feel like I said this in one of my newsletters too about, for anyone that got the newsletter, I quoted Tony Robbins, but I just said a man with incredibly big teeth one time said like knowledge is only like half power, but like action, like, because again, if you have a bunch of knowledge on something but you don't take any action with it, well then you don't really fucking know anything. Action is really power. And I look at this moon in Virgo squaring Mercury and Gemini, like you got all this information and what are you doing with it? Like it's like almost getting caught up too much in the data and the weeds, and the data and the information that you have isn't even helpful. It's just information, and you're not having anywhere to apply it. And that's kind of the hard part about Mercury and Gemini and the moon and Virgo is like, we might feel like, cool, we have access to this database. Cool, we have access to this information. Sweet, I'm going to organize it this way. But then you have all of it and you're like, I don't even know what to do with this. How does this even help me in the goal that I want to have? So then we get to Friday. The moon, while it's still in Virgo, will make a trine to Uranus. It will then make a square to Venus, and then it'll go opposite Neptune. So that's kind of a lot going on there. Then we have the Mercury Cazimi, which is the highlight for this week. And then the moon, while it's in Libra, the moon will then ingress into Libra, make a trine to Pluto, and trine Jupiter. So the moon, while it's in Virgo, trining Uranus, sounds great for a breakthrough. Sounds great for, again, if the moon in Virgo is, again, being a little bit more rational, detailed, logical, being more organized, cleaning our house, doing whatever. The moon making that trine Uranus is being innovative, having a creative spark, trying to do something new. If you're one of those like biohacker people like I am, I don't even like that term, but like I'm always just trying to find ways to, optimize anything in my life. Like, is there an easier way? Is there a better way? And sometimes I just stumble upon it, and sometimes I'm like actively researching it. But the moon trining Uranus just reminds me of, again, like finding a new way to optimize a system, finding a new ways to optimize something that you organize or something that you detail. But then the moon makes a square to Venus in Gemini, and it reminds me of like I live downtown, and because I live downtown, it's like every other day there's something going on. And like when the Denver Nuggets were, in the playoffs, the fucking Denver Nugget marching band, who kicked ass, they were an awesome band, just all of a sudden started playing. And then it's like, I can't get any work done because there's a party going on outside. And I'm just too like, what's going on out there? And just kind of people watching. That's kind of how I look at the moon in Virgo squaring Venus and Gemini, is kind of like, okay, now I want to get things done and I feel more inspired, but there's a band playing outside, or there is a protest going on outside, or there is some sort of, or again, your neighbors are throwing a party, or you get invited to some sort of a party or an outing. And so that is fun to some degree. I think also frustrating on another degree. Like with Venus and Gemini, like, are you really going to complain that there's something fun going on outside? It's kind of like, yeah, I wanted to do this thing, but it's Friday night. That's kind of the vibe. But then the moon goes opposite Neptune, where it's like one of those things where have you ever like gotten really organized and detailed, then you got sidetracked and distracted. Then you kind of come back to that thing and you're like, what the fuck was I even doing? Like, why? I have all this stuff and I felt inspired, but I don't remember any of it. That's what the moon opposite Neptune reminds me of. And then the moon goes into Libra. We'll talk about that, but let's talk about this Mercury Cazimi. The reason I really, really like this Mercury Cazimi is because Venus is in Gemini, Jupiter is in Gemini. We just had the Venus Cazimi. We already had the Sun-Jupiter conjunction that was technically in Taurus, but they are all in the sign of Mercury. And again, I said this last week, and someone even commented about this, about being in its chariot. And I was a big subscriber to the idea of a planet being in its chariot, which, if you're not familiar with, that is when a planet is really, really close to the sun, which technically we would call combust, or underneath the beams, which in traditional astrology, that means it's not functioning well. It's like it's on fire. You can't really see it, don't really know what's going on. But because it's in its own zodiac sign, so for example, this week, while Mercury is really close to the sun and technically it's under the beams and technically it's combust, we would say it's in its chariot because it's in its own zodiac sign, which means it would heighten its energy a lot more. Ryan Butler at Medieval Astrology Guide, I love astrologers that have opinions that really kind of shake up the status quo. And he just made this video. He's just like, dude, the chariot is dumb. It's like, because this is about synodic cycles and it's about refreshes and restarts. It's not like the sun literally burns everything that it touches, right? And just because a planet is near it in its own zodiac sign does not enhance its power at all, or make it, or does not take away its relationship to the sun, which is under combust. It is literally, with Mercury being towards its coming towards the sun in Cazimi, that is a sick or a dying planet. When it conjoins the sun and it goes Cazimi, that planet is reborn, the illness is ended, and then there's like a physical therapy rehab journey that goes after it. And I talked about that with the Venus Cazimi. So there is a part of all of the Mercury and Gemini stuff being like, we have all this information, we feel like we know what's going on, but maybe we really don't, and it's not going to be until Friday where we get that clarity. The reason I like the Mercury Cazimi too is, again, this is helping Venus, this is helping Jupiter. We have all of this fun stuff going on in Gemini. We have all of this expansion, all of this stimulation. I feel like Mercury just has to get there and kind of has to, like, again, it reminds me of a surprise party. You got a surprise party going on at your house. It's your birthday. All your friends are there. Your family's there. You can feel overwhelmed. You don't even know what's going on. There's all these people you haven't talked to. It's like Mercury Cazimi is like the moment where it's like, all right, you can kind of maybe settle down, not have your nerves so high, relax a little bit. You're talking, you're chit-chatting, you kind of take in the moment of like, oh, this is fun. Now I can have a little bit more fun with my surprise birthday party. So just the Mercury Cazimi just, in my opinion, brings a lot of clarity. And maybe not even, when I say clarity, I don't mean like, yes, there is a light bulb moment to it, but more so about like taking in all of the information. Have you ever, again, maybe this has been studying astrology or studying any sort of class where like on the surface you get it, but then there's a moment where you learn something where you're like, oh, like just for whatever reason, all of the knobs kind of turn and click where you go, oh, I thought I understood it, but now I really, really understand it. That's what Friday is about. So there is, again, and I like that for the moon while it's in Virgo, making that trine to Uranus. There's a bunch of clarity happening here. And then after that, by Friday evening, the moon will ingress into Libra. It's going to trine Pluto, and it's going to trine Jupiter. I like this. However, I'm hesitant to be as positive about it just because the moon is getting closer and closer to K2 at this point. The south node is still in Libra. So there's, and again, we're going to talk about Saturday with this, but the moon going into Libra, trining Pluto, and then trining Jupiter reminds me of like strengthening relationships, having these powerful connections with other people. And the moon in Libra making that trine to Jupiter and Gemini is kind of like, again, it almost reminds me of like speed dating. Like I'm going to talk to this person, and then 5 minutes later we're going to go to this person, and then 5 minutes later we're going to go to this person. And just like how much can we do in the small amount of time, or how much information can we get from other people in like a short amount of time? That's what it kind of reminds me of. And so the moon in Libra making a trine to Jupiter, we got all this air stuff going on at the moment. I think it's just a good time to, again, connect, share, relate. It's a Friday night. I think you should go out on Friday night, just enjoy yourself and talk to people. But then we get to Saturday. And, as I was writing this horoscope down, I was kind of looking at Saturday like, oh, that's weird. Because the only thing we have going on Saturday is the moon conjoining the south node. Moon's not really doing anything besides that. And with the south node, again, there's a part of it that it's like, yes, it's draining. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's, tiring, or something goes away. But there's another part of it that is like, again, I hate using the word karmic because so many people use that term and they don't even know what it means, or they're using it in the wrong place, or they just love using the term karmic because it's a buzzword. But the moon conjoining the south node, and that's it going on Saturday, is like, I wonder what kind of relationship situations, or again, this is the moon in Libra, so this could even be about balance or justice. But typically with Libra, it is going to involve some sort of a relationship. And again, that could be anyone, not just like your significant other, but just like with a one-on-one person that like something happens that feels fated, or that felt like that was supposed to happen, or again, kind of shifts the energy a little bit regarding relationships, regarding people. I don't know. There's just something about Saturday that sticks out to me with just the moon conjoining the south node. This might be, again, hanging out with people, and then you're like, I don't want to hang out with these people anymore. You go out on Friday night, you wake up at your friend's house and you guys are all hungover and you're like, all right, I'm not fucking doing this anymore. You guys are just too much of party animals. But the moon conjoining the south node just seems, yes, draining, exhausting, but it's bringing something up for your attention, right? I don't know. There's just something about Saturday I want you to pay attention to. So then we get to Sunday. And on Sunday, the moon, while it's in Libra, will still make a trine to Mercury. It will then trine Venus as well at the same time. And by late Sunday, pretty much into Monday morning, the moon will ingress into Scorpio. We also have Venus making a square to Neptune very, very late in the evening. And then Venus enters Cancer essentially like at like 1 a.m. Mountain Time. Venus enters Cancer on Monday morning. So we're going to talk about Venus in Cancer next week, but I just think it is important that this happens really late Sunday night or early Monday morning. But let's talk about Sunday. The moon in Libra making a trine to Mercury and Venus. I love that. Saturday has this weird faded vibe to it with relationships, but Sunday doesn't. Sunday's like moon in Libra, trining Mercury and Venus. There's a lot of fun yapping going on here. There's a lot of fun connection. There's a lot of, almost reminds me of, again, it's been a while since we've done a drug reference. Here we go. You all ready? Have you ever done a bag with a bunch of friends and it's like that, halfway done with the bag and it's just yap. And if you've never done, blow before, like if you've never done blow or been around people that do blow, essentially it is just a yap fest. It is like people are just, it's my turn to talk and like that is what it is. And there's a lot of fun to it, by the way. I don't do that shit anymore, but it's a lot of fun. There's a reason why people are into it. But the moon in Libra just reminds me of just like trining Mercury and Gemini with Venus and Gemini. Like, let's talk about this. What's that business plan? There's a quote. I think it's from Ted, and he's like, if we're gonna start that Italian restaurant, we gotta start that now, because they're all like on coke and talk about business plans, which is just like everyone who's ever done coke ever with their friends. But it's like, if we're gonna start that Italian restaurant, we gotta do it now. That's the vibe. I really do like Mercury and Gemini with Venus and Gemini. It's a lot of chatty Cathy. It's a lot of fun, especially with the moon in Libra. I don't think that any of this is bad, but I do find it interesting that the moon ingresses into Scorpio really late. So it's like, okay, if you're someone who has done blow before, and it's all fun and games until it's like that 3 a.m. time, and you're kind of tired, but your heart rate's at like 140 beats per minute, and you can't really go to sleep, and you got that jaw, and you're hungry, but you're not. The moon in Scorpio just kind of like kills the vibe pretty quickly. That happens at like pretty much a midnight, 1 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And so it's one of those things of like, oh, it's all fun and games until it's time to like actually do the body stuff, which is like go to sleep, get a good night's sleep. Your heart's going a million miles an hour. The other thing is it's Venus and Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces. The reason why I feel like the drug analogy is perfect here, because like Venus and Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces, you're not going to start the Italian restaurant. You're not going to start the business. You're not going to do that. Venus and Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces, though, is there's sometimes where we think we want to have fun, or something that we think is fun, or that we think that we want to do, we realize all that glitter is not gold. And with Neptune in the superior position here, there's a part of us that's like, oh, like I'm here and this is fun and amazing, but it didn't live up to my expectations. And that could be in a good way, like thinking like, oh, I'm going into this thinking one way and I came out thinking in another way, and it was, fine. It wasn't necessarily bad. I just wasn't expecting it to be that way. But there is another part of it that is like, you're looking for the stimulation, you're looking for these connections, and then it squares Neptune, and it reminds me of like your stereotypical like girls trip. It's like girls like will always plan a big trip together, and it's gonna be a bunch of fun. But then when they get there, there's like drama, and one girl doesn't want to do this, and one girl doesn't want to do that, and then it's just a bunch of drama, and then like no one ends up having fun. And even though they didn't have fun, they're always like, oh my god, that was the best trip ever. That's like a typical girls trip. I know that because that's like everything my sister's ever done with any of her girlfriends. But Venus squaring Neptune, that's just what it reminds me of, like looking for all this fun, but there's a cloud of illusion, there's a cloud of confusion that makes it just like not as fun. Or again, Venus and Gemini squaring Neptune and Pisces is like, there's a certain threshold of, loud music, talking with people, alcohol, that is really fun. And then you hit that threshold where it becomes instantaneously not fun. You're woozy, you're throwing up, you're crying, and now you're just like, you black out, you don't even know what's going on. That's like Venus square Neptune, where it's like, let's understand where the threshold is here and when maybe to call it quits. So again, you're not yacked out at 2 a.m, you can't go to sleep, and now you feel like shit the next day because it's going to be Monday the next day. You got shit to do. Very late into Sunday night, pretty much Monday mornings when Venus ingresses into Cancer. And personally, I'm really looking forward to all of the Cancer transits we have coming up. And of course, that is something we'll talk about next week, because next week we have Mercury in Gemini making a square to Neptune. We have Venus ingressing into Cancer, Mercury ingressing into Cancer. Mercury will conjoin Venus in Cancer, loving that. The Sun will make a square to Neptune. The Sun will ingress into Cancer. We have our summer solstice. And then we have the full moon in Capricorn pretty much on the summer solstice. A lot of changes next week, but they're like good changes. It's like less Gemini stuff, more like homey, Cancer, feeling good stuff. So I'm really excited about it. Guys, let me know what you think about this week in the comments below. Let me know what you're looking forward to and not looking forward to. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, it helps me out a lot. And like this video if you really did enjoy the content. And with that being said, I'll be seeing you guys next week.